Baptism of Christ Sunday rolls around on the church calendar the first Sunday after Epiphany, and it kicks off both the New Year and the Epiphany season. And our lesson is one of four gospel accounts of Jesus' baptism, which started his ministry. We consider it now as we start our New Year and segue into the Epiphany season from Christmas season. Both are times of transition for us, just as Jesus' baptism was a time of transition for him. But we know now, too, that Jesus' baptism and ministry led to a cosmic transition, beginning a new way to salvation from our lesser ways of being. In the words of one of our Advent and Christmas stories, Jesus' way leads to peace on earth, goodwill to all. And although it was new back then, Christians have always traced it back to the promise God made to Abraham, who was on his own way. Genesis 12 indicates that through Abraham, God would make a great nation, and all families of the earth shall be blessed. And tradition has long held that Jesus' transition to creating his way started through John the Baptist. John's own way invited people to come out to the wilderness, cross into the Jordan River, and be baptized as a means of repenting sins and mediating a connection with the Holy. Now, scholars think John's efforts and way included an element of protest, reenacting Joshua's crossing the Jordan River to occupy the Promised Land. And the protest symbolically took back the Promised Land from occupying Roman forces and their crony temple elite. And in the original Joshua story, God parted the river so Joshua on his own way could lead God's people through it. And our lesson that we heard today is usually heard as focusing on John and then shifting focus to Jesus. And I think we tend to think of Jesus in isolation out there in the river with John, but as Luke actually points out, John baptized Jesus with all the people. And so there was a bit of a gathering, not for a new year, but for new beginnings all the same. The gathered were repenting. They were turning away from their old ways and looking hopefully toward a new holy way that John's baptism offered. This was a gathering of people who had been on broken paths, people wanting to repair that brokenness. Jesus was not afraid to join them. Out there with John at the Jordan, it was a time and a place of transition for everybody, not just on a cosmic scale, the birth of Jesus' ministry and way, but on each individual's birth, on new ways of being for them. But for sure, the collective memory of the early Jesus followers was that Jesus' ministry started with his baptism, with a mass of people who were in various states of disrepair. But we tend to lose sight of the fact that in this story, Jesus mingled with all those people, stood in line with them, shared the same water and religious leader, and of course, the same God and Jewish faith. And like all those others who gathered, Jesus let the water of the Jordan River wash over him as John parted the river by dipping Jesus below the currents of those sacred baptism waters. And the waters of the very river that were parted centuries ago by Joshua, the Hebrews crossed into the Promised Land, seeking refuge and well-being for their weary nation. In stark contrast to Joshua's story, the entire river, of course, doesn't part in our story today. Just a few leaders part as bodies are submerged. But something else much bigger does miraculously part. Heaven parts in this story. And we know now that heaven's parting was a piece of the beginning of Jesus' way of refuge and well-being for more than just a weary nation. Out of the parting of heaven, a part of heaven came to earth to fulfill the promise of peace on earth, goodwill to all. That part of heaven is the part of God we call the Holy Spirit. It arrived in the form of a peace, which has ever since is now also known as a part of God, Christ. And after the Spirit dove landed on Jesus, the Creator's approving voice pealed forth from heaven, blessing Jesus. What happened that day pleased the Creator. And the way the story is told in Luke, Jesus did something different than the others who were being baptized. The others' response was to wonder if John was the Messiah, not Jesus. His response was to pray. He went down to the river to pray. He communicated with God. And communicating with God is a big deal in Luke, and Jesus does it a lot. And God's response to Jesus' baptism and prayer caused heaven itself to part and send to earth God's Spirit in the form of a dove, a universal sign of peace. The simple message for all of us is that baptism and prayer can lead to peace on earth and the praise of God. And that's a great and a true message. It's interesting, though, to also juxtapose Luke's story of Jesus at the Jordan with Joshua's story at the Jordan. God helped Joshua show the Hebrews the way to the promised land. Joshua prayerfully learned from God that if holy men carried the Ark of the Covenant, housing the Torah, into the Jordan, the river would part, and it did. The priests got the Ark to the middle and stopped. And then all the people walked on dry land between the parted waters onto the promised land, giving the Hebrews much needed refuge. In Jesus' baptism story, God helped John prayerfully learn that Jesus was the Messiah, and God sent that holy man, John, to stand in the middle of the Jordan River, not with Torah, but with Jesus. And the whole river didn't part to make way for specific people to gain refuge. Another miracle happened. Heaven parted to make way for all people to gain refuge, to have peace. Heaven on earth. And the way to heaven on earth began through a man upon whom the Holy Spirit could be found and could still be found, Jesus. What makes this even more interesting to me is that although the names Joshua and Jesus appear to be different in our Bibles, they are literally translation of the same Hebrew name, Yeshua. Both are progeny of Abraham. Under Joshua, the first Yeshua, the way God provided was Torah, which at the Jordan led to a geographic refuge for the well-being of Hebrews on earth. Under Jesus, the new Yeshua for Christians, the way God provided at the Jordan is Jesus, who leads a way to heavenly refuge and well-being on earth for everyone. It's good to find a home, a nation, as a promised land for refuge, protection, and peace, what we could call well-being. The Hebrew people needed it desperately in Joshua's time. Jesus' followers understand Jesus, a Jewish rabbi, came along to emphasize a way of refuge for all by providing an epiphany to anyone who has ears and will listen. And the epiphany is that all people need and deserve well-being all the time, which is, if we think about it, heaven on earth. It's both a Jewish and a Christian goal, summed up in the supreme Old and New Testament command to love others. That command is found in the words of Torah and in the words of Jesus. Jesus' way is a continuation of God's promise to Abraham that through him all the families of the earth shall be blessed. May we continue